The Jumping Frog, by Mark Twain. Written about 1865. In English, then, even a criminal is entitled to fair play, and certainly when a man who has done no harm has been unjustly treated, he is privileged to do his best to right himself. My attention has just been called to an article some 3 years old in a French magazine entitled Revue des Deux Mondes, Review of some Two Worlds, wherein the writer treats of les humoristes américains, these humorists Americans. I am one of these humorists Americans dissected by him, and hence the complaint I am making. This gentleman's article is an able one, as articles go in the French, where they always tangle up everything to that degree that when you start into a sentence you never know whether you are going to come out alive or not. It is a very good article, and the writer says all manner of kind and complimentary things about me, for which I am sure I thank him with all my heart. But then, why should he go and spoil all his praise by one unlucky experiment? What I refer to is this. He says my Jumping Frog is a funny story, but still he can't see why it should ever really convulse anyone with laughter, and straightway proceeds to translate it into French in order to prove to his nation that there is nothing so very extravagantly funny about it. Just there is where my complaint originates. He has not translated it at all. He has simply mixed it all up. It is no more like the Jumping Frog when he gets through with it than I am like a meridian of longitude. But my mere assertion is not proof, wherefore I print the French version, that all may see that I do not speak falsely. Furthermore, in order that even the unlettered may know my injury and give me their compassion, I have been at infinite pains and trouble to retranslate this French version back into English, and to tell the truth I have well nigh worn myself out at it, having scarcely rested from my work during 5 days and nights. I cannot speak the French language, but I can translate very well, though not fast, I being self-educated. I ask the reader to run his eye over the original English version of the Jumping Frog, and then read the French or my retranslation, and kindly take notice how the Frenchman has riddled the grammar. I think it is the worst I ever saw, and yet the French are called a polished nation. If I had a boy that put sentences together as they do, I would polish him to some purpose. Without further introduction, the Jumping Frog, as I originally wrote it, was as follows. After it will be found the French version, and after the latter my retranslation from the French. The notorious Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, pronounced Calaveras. In compliance with the request of a friend of mine who wrote me from the East, I called on good-natured, garrulous old Simon Wheeler, and inquired after my friend's friend, Leonidas W. Smiley, as requested to do, and I hereunto append the result. I have a lurking suspicion that Leonidas W. Smiley is a myth, that my friend never knew such a personage, and that he only conjectured that if I asked old Wheeler about him it would remind him of his infamous Jim Smiley, and he would go to work and bore me to death with some exasperating reminiscence of him as long and as tedious as it should be useless to me. If that was the design, it succeeded. I found Simon Wheeler dozing comfortably by the bar-room stove of the dilapidated tavern in the decayed mining camp of Angels, and I noticed that he was fat and bald-headed, and had an expression of winning gentleness and simplicity upon his tranquil countenance. He roused up and gave me good day. I told him that a friend of mine had commissioned me to make some inquiries about a cherished companion of his boyhood named Leonidas W. Smiley, Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, a young minister of the gospel, who he had heard was at one time resident of Angel's Camp. I added that if Mr. Wheeler could tell me anything about this Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, I would feel under many obligations to him. Simon Wheeler backed me into a corner and blockaded me there with his chair, and then sat down and reeled off the monotonous narrative which follows this paragraph. He never smiled, he never frowned, he never changed his voice from the gentle flowing key to which he tuned his initial sentence. He never betrayed the slightest suspicion of enthusiasm. But all through the interminable narrative there ran a vein of impressive earnestness and sincerity which showed me plainly that, so far from his imagining that there was anything ridiculous or funny about his story, he regarded it as a really important matter, and admired its two heroes as men of transcendent genius in finesse. I let him go on in his own way, and never interrupted him once. "Reverend Leonidas W. Reverend Le... well, there was a feller here once by the name of Jim Smiley in the winter of '49. Or maybe it was the spring of '50. I don't recollect exactly, somehow, though what makes me think it was one or the other is because I remember the big flume warn't finished when he first come to the camp. But anyway, he was the curiousest man about always betting on anything that turned up you ever see, if he could get anybody to bet on the other side. And if he couldn't, he'd change sides. Any way that suited the other man would suit him. Anyway, just so's he got a bet, he was satisfied. But still he was lucky, uncommon lucky. He most always come out winner. He was always ready and laying for a chance. There couldn't be no solitary thing mentioned but that feller'd offer to bet on it and take ary side you please, as I was just telling you. If there was a horse race, you'd find him flush, or you'd find him busted at the end of it. If there was a dog fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a cat fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a chicken fight, he'd bet on it. Why, if there was two birds setting on a fence, he would bet you which one would fly first. Or if there was a camp meeting, he would be there regular to bet on Parson Walker, which he judged to be the best exhorter about here, and so he was, too, and a good man. If he even see a straddle-bug start to go anywheres, he would bet you how long it would take him to get to wherever he was going to, and if you took him up, he would foller that straddle-bug to Mexico, but what he would find out where he was bound for and how long he was on the road. Lots of the boys here has seen that Smiley and can tell you about him. Why, it never made no difference to him. He'd bet on anything, the dangdest feller. Parson Walker's wife laid very sick once, for a good while, and it seemed as if they warn't going to save her. But one morning he come in, and Smiley up and asked him how she was, and he said she was considerable better, thank the Lord for his infinite mercy, and coming on so smart that with the blessing of Providence she'd get well yet. And Smiley, before he thought, says, "Well, I'll risk 2.5 she don't, anyway." This here Smiley had a mare. The boys called her the 15-minute nag, but that was only in fun, you know, because of course she was faster than that, and he used to win money on that horse, for all she was so slow and always had the asthma or the distemper or the consumption or something of that kind. They used to give her 200 or 300 yards start, and then pass her under way. But always at the fag end of the race she'd get excited and desperate like, and come cavorting and straddling up, and scattering her legs around limber, sometimes in the air and sometimes out to one side among the fences, and kicking up more dust and raising more racket with her coughing and sneezing and blowing her nose, and always fetch up at the stand just about a neck ahead, as near as you could cipher it down. And he had a little small bull-pup, that to look at him you'd think he warn't worth a cent but to set around and look ornery and lay for a chance to steal something. But as soon as money was up on him he was a different dog. His underjaw'd begin to stick out like a forecastle of a steamboat, and his teeth would uncover and shine like the furnaces, and a dog might tackle him and bullyrag him and bite him and throw him over his shoulder 2 or 3 times, and Andrew Jackson, which was the name of the pup, Andrew Jackson would never let on but that he was satisfied, and hadn't expected nothing else, and the bets being doubled and doubled on the other side all the time, till the money was all up, and then all of a sudden he would grab that other dog just by the joint of his hind leg and freeze to it, not chaw, you understand, but only just grip and hang on till they throwed up the sponge, if it was a year. Smiley always come out winner on that pup, till he harnessed a dog once that didn't have no hind legs, because they'd been sawed off in a circular saw, and when the thing had gone along far enough and the money was all up, and he come to make a snatch for his pet Holt, he see in a minute how he'd been imposed on, and how the other dog had him in the door, so to speak, and he peered surprised, and then he looked sort of discouraged like, and didn't try no more to win the fight, and so he got shucked out bad. He give Smiley a look, as much as to say his heart was broke, and it was his fault for putting up a dog that hadn't no hind legs for him to take holt of, which was his main dependence in a fight, and then he limped off a piece and laid down and died. It was a good pup, was that Andrew Jackson, and would have made a name for hisself if he'd lived, for the stuff was in him and he had genius. I know it, because he hadn't no opportunities to speak of, and it don't stand to reason that a dog could make such a fight as he could under them circumstances if he hadn't no talent. It always makes me feel sorry when I think of that last fight of his'n and the way it turned out. Well, this year Smiley had rat-terriers and chicken-cocks and tom-cats and all them kind of things till you couldn't rest, and you couldn't fetch nothing for him to bet on but he'd match you. He ketched a frog one day and took him home, and said he cal'lated to educate him, and so he never done nothing for 3 months but set in his backyard and learn that frog to jump. And you bet you he did learn him, too. He'd give him a little punch behind, and the next minute you'd see that frog whirling in the air like a doughnut, see him turn one somerset, or maybe a couple, if he got a good start, and come down flat-footed and all right like a cat. He got him up so in the matter of catching flies, and kept him in practice so constant that he'd nail a fly every time as fur as he could see him. Smiley said all the frog wanted was education, and he could do most anything, and I believe him. Why, I've seen him set Dan'l Webster down here on this floor, Dan'l Webster was the name of the frog, and sing out, "Flies, Daniel, flies!" and quicker you could wink he'd spring straight up and snake a fly off in the counter there, and flop down on the floor again as solid as a gob of mud, and fall to scratching the side of his head with his hind foot as indifferent as if he hadn't no idea he'd been doing any more than any frog might do. You never see a frog so modest and straightforward as he was, for all he was so gifted. And when it come to fair and square jumping on a dead level, he could get over more ground at one straddle than any animal of his breed you ever see. Jumping on a dead level was his strong suit, you understand, and when it come to that, Smiley would ante up money on him as long as he had a red. Smiley was monstrous proud of his frog, and well he might be, for fellers that had traveled and been everywheres all said he laid over any frog that ever they see. Well, Smiley kept the beast in a little lattice box, and he used to fetch him downtown sometimes and lay for a bet. One day a feller, a stranger in the camp he was, come across him with his box, and says, "What might it be that you've got in the box?" And Smiley says, sorter indifferent like, "It might be a parrot, or might be a canary, maybe, but it ain't. It's only just a frog." And the feller took it and looked at it careful, and turned it around this way and that, and says, "So 'tis. Well, what's he good for?" "Well," Smiley says, easy and careless, "he's good for one thing, I should judge. He can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." The feller took the box again, and took another long, particular look, and give it back to Smiley, and says, very deliberate, "Well," he says, "I don't see no p'ints about that frog that's any better'n any other frog." "Maybe you don't," Smiley says. "Maybe you understand frogs, and maybe you don't understand 'em. Maybe you've had experience, and maybe you ain't only an amateur, as it were. Anyways, I've got my opinion, and I'll resk $40 that he can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." And the feller studied a minute, and then says, kinder sad-like, "Well, I'm only a stranger here, and I ain't got no frog, but if I had a frog I'd bet you." And then Smiley says, "That's all right. That's all right. If you'll hold my box a minute, I'll go and get you a frog." And so the feller took the box, and put up his $40 along with Smiley's, and set down to wait. So he set there a good while thinking and thinking to himself, and then he got the frog out and prized his mouth open, and took a teaspoon and filled him full of quail shot, filled him pretty near up to his chin, and set him on the floor. Smiley he went to the swamp and slopped around in the mud for a long time, and finally he ketched a frog, and fetched him in, and give him to this feller, and says, "Now, if you're ready, set him alongside of Dan'l, with his forepaws just even with Dan'l's, and I'll give the word." Then he says, "1, 2, 3, Git! And him and the feller touches up the frogs from behind, and the new frog hopped off lively, but Dan'l give a heave and histed up his shoulders, so, like a Frenchman. But it warn't no use. He couldn't budge. He was planted as solid as a church, and he couldn't no more stir than if he was anchored out. Smiley was a good deal surprised, and he was disgusted, too, but he didn't have no idea what the matter was, of course. The feller took the money and started away, and when he was going out at the door he sort of jerked his thumb over his shoulder, so, at Dan'l, and says again, very deliberate, "Well," he says, "I don't see no p'ints about that frog that's any better'n any other frog." Smiley he stood scratching his head and looking down at Dan'l a long time, and at last he says, "I do wonder what in the nation that frog throwed off for. I wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. He 'pears to look mighty baggy, somehow." And he ketched Dan'l by the nape of the neck and hefted him, and says, "Why, blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pound," and turned him upside down, and he belched out a double handful of shot. And then he see how it was, and he was the maddest man. He set the frog down and took out after that feller, but he never ketched him, and here Simon Wheeler heard his name called from the front yard, and got up to see what was wanted. And turning to me as he moved away, he said, "Just set where you are, stranger, and rest easy. I ain't going to be gone a second." But by your leave, I did not think that a continuation of the history of the enterprising vagabond Jim Smiley would be likely to afford me much information concerning the Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, and so I started away. At the door I met the sociable Wheeler returning, and he buttonholed me and recommenced. "Well, this here Smiley had a yaller one-eyed cow that didn't have no tail, only just a short stump like a banana, and—" However, lacking both time and inclination, I did not wait to hear about the afflicted cow, but took my leave. Now let the learned look upon this picture, and say if iconoclasm can further go. From the Revue des Deux Mondes of July 15th, 1872. Translation of the above, back from the French. The frog jumping the county of Calaveras. There was one time here an individual known under the name of Jim Smiley. It was in the winter of '49, possibly well at the spring of '50, I know me recollect not exactly. This which me makes to believe that it was the one or the other, it is that I shall remember that the grand flume is not achieved when he arrives at the camp for the first time, but of all sides he was the man the most fond of to bet which one have seen, betting upon all that which is presented, when he could find an adversary, and when he not of it could not, he passed to the side opposed. All that which convenienced to the other, to him convenienced also. Seeing that he had a bet, Smiley was satisfied. And he had a chance even worthless, nearly always he gained. It must to say that he was always near to himself expose, but one no could mention the least thing without that Gaillard offered to bet the bottom, no matter what, and to take the side that one him would, as it said, all at the hour, tout à l'heure. If it there was of races, you him find rich or ruined at the end. If it there is a combat of dogs, he bring his bet. He himself laid always for a combat of cats, for a combat of cocks, by blue. If you have see two birds upon a fence, you should have offered of to bet which of those birds shall fly the first. And if there is meeting at the camp, meeting au camp, he comes to bet regularly for the Curé Walker, which he judged to be the best predicator of the neighborhood, prédicateur des environs, and which he was in effect, and a brave man. He would encounter a bug of wood in the road, whom he will bet upon the time which he shall take to go where she would go, and if you him have take at the word, he will follow the bug as far as Mexic, without himself caring to go so far, neither of the time which he there lost. One time the woman of the Curé Walker is very sick during long time. It seemed that one not her saved not. But one morning the Curé arrives, and Smiley him demanded how she goes, and he said that she is well better, grace to the infinite misery, lui demande comme elle va, et il dit qu'elle est bien mieux, grâce à l'infinie miséricorde. So much better that with the benediction of the Providence she herself of it would pull out, elle s'en tirerait. And behold, that without their thinking, Smiley responds, "Well, I gauge 2½ that she will die all of same." This Smiley had an animal which the boys called the nag of the quarter of hour, but solely for pleasantry, you comprehend, because, well, understand, she was more fast as that. Now, why that exclamation? M.T. And it was custom of to gain of the silver with this beast, notwithstanding she was poussive, cornard, always taken of asthma, of colics, or of consumption, or something of approaching. One him would give 200 or 300 yards at the departure, then one him passed without pain, but never at the last she not fail of herself échauffer, of herself exasperate, and she arrives herself écartant, se défendant, her legs grêle in the air before the obstacles, sometimes them elevating and making with this more of dust than any horse, more of noise above with his éternuement and reniflement, crack. She arrives then always first by one head, as just as one can it measure. And he had a small bulldog, bulldog, who to him see no value, not a cent. One would believe that to bet against him it was to steal, so much he was ordinary. But as soon as the game made, she becomes another dog. Her jaw inferior commenced to project like a deck of before, his teeth themselves discover brilliant like some furnaces, and a dog could him tackle, le taquiner, him excite, him murder, le mordre, him throw 2 or 3 times over his shoulder. André Jackson, this was the name of the dog, André Jackson takes that tranquillity, as if he not himself was never expecting other thing, and when the bets were doubled and redoubled against him, he you sees the other dog just at the articulation of the leg of behind, and he not it leave more, not that he masticate you conceive, but he himself there shall be holding during until that one throws the sponge in the air, must he wait a year. Smiley gained always with this beast là. Unhappily, they have finished by elevating a dog who no had not a feet of behind, because one them had sawed. And when things were at the point that he would, and that he came to himself throw upon his morsel favorite, the poor dog comprehended in an instant that he himself was deceived in him, and that the other dog him had. You know have never seen person having the air more penaud and more discouraged. He not made no effort to gain the combat, and was rudely shucked. Eh bien, this Smiley nourished some terriers à rat, and some cocks of combat, and some cats, and all sorts of things, and with his rage of betting one no had more of repose. He trapped one day a frog, and him imported with him, et l'emporta chez lui, saying that he pretended to make his education. You me believe if you will, but during 3 months he not has nothing done but to him apprehend to jump, apprendre à sauter, in a court retired of her mansion, de sa maison. And you respond that he have succeeded. Him, gives a small blow by behind, and the instant after you shall see the frog turn in the air like a grease biscuit, make 1 somersault, sometimes 2, when she was well started, and refall upon his feet like a cat. Him had accomplished in the art of to gobble the flies, gober des mouches, and him there exercised continually, so well that a fly at the most far that she appeared was a fly lost. Smiley had custom to say that all which lacked to a frog it was the education, but with the education she could do nearly all, and him believe. Tenez, him have seen pose Daniel Webster there upon this plank, Daniel Webster was the name of the frog, and to him sing, "Some flies, Daniel, some flies." In a flash of the eye, Daniel had bounded and seized a fly here upon the counter, then jumped anew at the earth, where he rested truly to himself, scratched the head with his behind foot, as if he no had not the least idea of his superiority. Never you not have seen frog as modest, as natural sweet, as she was. and when he himself agitated to jump purely and simply upon plain earth, she does more ground in one jump than any beast of his species than you can know. To jump plain, this was his strong. When he himself agitated for that, Smiley multiplied the bets upon her as long as there to him remained a red. It must to know Smiley was monstrously proud of his frog, and he of it was right, for some men who were traveled, who had all seen, said that they to him would be injurious to him compared to another frog. Smiley guarded Daniel in a little box latticed which he carried by times to the village for some bet. One day an individual stranger at the camp him arrested with his box, and him said, "What is this that you have them shut up there within?" Smiley said with an air indifferent, "That could be a paroquet, or a syringe, ou un serent, but this no is nothing of such. It not is but a frog." The individual it took, it regarded with care, it turned from one side and from the other, then he said, "Tiens, in effect, at what is she good?" "My God," responds Smiley, always with an air disengaged, "she is good for one thing, to my notice, à mon avis. She can batter in jumping, elle peut battre en sautant, all frogs of the county of Calaveras." The individual retook the box, it examined of new longly, and it rendered to Smiley in saying with an air deliberate, "Eh bien, I no saw not that that frog had nothing of better than each frog. Je ne vois pas que cette grenouille ait rien de mieux qu'aucune grenouille." If that isn't grammar gone to seed, then I count myself no judge. M.T. "Possible that you not it saw not," said Smiley. "Possible that you comprehend frogs, possible that you not you, there comprehend nothing. Possible that you had of the experience, and possible that you not be but an amateur. Of all manner, de toute manière, I bet $40 that she batter in jumping no matter which frog of the county of Calaveras." The individual reflected a second, and said, like sad, "I not am but a stranger here, I no have not a frog, but if I of it had one, I would embrace the bet." "Strong well," responds Smiley, "nothing of more facility. If you will hold my box a minute, I go you to search a frog. J'irai vous chercher." Behold then the individual who guards the box, who puts his $40 upon those of Smiley, and who attends, et qui attend. He attended enough long times, reflecting all solely. And figure you that he takes Daniel, him opens the mouth by force, and with a teaspoon him fills with shot of the hunt, even him fills just to the chin, then he him puts by the earth. Smiley during these times was at slopping in a swamp. Finally he trapped attrapé a frog, him carried to that individual, and said, "Now if you be ready, put him all against Daniel, with their before feet upon the same line, and I give the signal." Then he added, "1, 2, 3, advance!" Him and the individual touched their frogs by behind, and the frog knew, put to jump smartly, but Daniel himself lifted ponderously, exalted the shoulders thus, like a Frenchman. To what good? He not could budge, he is planted solid like a church, he not advance no more than if one him had put at the anchor. Smiley was surprised and disgusted, but he not himself doubted not of the turn being intended, mais il ne se doutait pas du tour, bien entendu. The individual impocketed the silver, himself with it went, and of it himself in going is it that he no gives not a jerk of thumb over the shoulder, like that, at poor Daniel, in saying with his air deliberate, "L'individu l'empoche l'argent, s'en va, et en s'en allant est-ce qu'il ne donne pas un coup de pouce par-dessus l'épaule, comme ça, au pauvre Daniel, en disant de son air délibéré, Eh bien, I no see not that that frog has nothing of better than another." Smiley himself scratched long times the head, the eyes fixed upon Daniel, until that which at last he said, "I me demand how the devil it makes itself that this beast has refused. Is it that she had something? one would believe that she is stuffed." He grasped Daniel by the skin of the neck, him lifted, and said, "The wolf me bite if he no weigh not 5 pounds." He him reversed, and the unhappy belched 2 handfuls of shot. Et le malheureux, etc. When Smiley recognized how it was, he was like mad. He deposited his frog by the earth, and ran after that individual, but he not him caught never. Such is the jumping frog to the distorted French eye. I claim that I never put together such an odious mixture of bad grammar and delirium tremens in my life. And what has a poor foreigner like me done to be abused and misrepresented like this? When I say, "Well, I don't see no p'ints about that frog that's any better'n any other frog," is it kind, is it just, for this Frenchman to try to make it appear that I said, "Eh bien, I no saw not that that frog had nothing of better than each frog"? I have no heart to write more. I never felt so about anything before. Hartford, March, 1875.
If you like the video, put a like, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell to not miss our new videos.